Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, greetings from Seattle. I'm Anita Ramasastry, the current chair of the UN Working Group on Business and Human Rights. Our role is to implement the UN guiding principles and to work with business, states, and civil society in doing so. Thank you for the invitation to participate in the closing plenary today. I'm honored to be invited by ICoCA, which provides a valuable forum for policymakers, practitioners, and experts to discuss and debate crucial issues of respect for human rights by providers of private security services. Both the ICoCA and the Montreux Initiative are important platforms to exchange good practice in ensuring that private security providers respect human rights and also help states to best support this worthy goal. We can use these platforms to tackle some of the world's most pressing challenges, and I look forward to exploring further avenues of collaboration and engagement between you and your organizations individually and collectively with ICoCA and the working group. As you know, business operations in fragile and conflict-affected contexts, including those involving security providers, is an issue of specific importance for the working group for the simple reason that the worst forms of business-related human rights abuse tend to happen in conflict-affected contexts. This concern is shared by many, and ICoCA and the Montreux Initiative are probably the best proof of this. ICoCA is an example of a multi-stakeholder process that builds upon the UN guiding principles in terms of the core concepts of human rights due diligence to identify, mitigate, and remedy adverse human rights impacts. This is an example of what the working group refers to as policy coherence, as the guiding principles are embedded in other governance instruments and frameworks, such as the Code of Conduct. The multi-stakeholder format has allowed the organization to involve the input and participation of the private sector, states, civil society, and academics. ICoCA has and continues to tackle key challenges as they arise, being able to move forward with a strong foundational code of conduct that incorporates certification and to explore new areas such as the issue of operational level grievance mechanisms, for example. While I noticed a recent webinar on the ICoCA website describes the ICoCA code of conduct and its mechanism as an example of an industry-specific soft law instrument intended to strengthen human rights due diligence in the private security supply chain. I would note that it is actually more, that it has created a situation where such a soft law standard can become a harder one because it is embedded in government procurement of security services. This hybrid approach of linking government contracts to such a standard is an innovative approach that links government incentives to a code to which industry has agreed and has an active and ongoing stake, as opposed to purely top-down static regulation. In addition, now that the EU and different nations are moving towards mandatory human rights due diligence measures, ICoCA provides a framework that makes it easier for the private security sector to comply with new regulatory requirements and to adapt to them. It also may pave the way in terms of what robust human rights due diligence looks like, accompanied and supported by a sector-specific multi-stakeholder initiative. In the space of complex, fragile, and conflict-affected environments, there is still much more to be done, however, which is why the working group focused our last and most recent report specifically on this issue. The working group presented its most recent report entitled Business, Human Rights, and Conflict-Affected Regions Towards Heightened Action, which I led to the General Assembly in October of 2020. Concretely, the report looks at the state of play in the field of business, human rights, and conflict, and aims at clarifying the practical steps that states alone, or when acting as members of multilateral organizations and business, should take to implement the guiding principles, to prevent and address business-related human rights abuse in conflict and post-conflict settings. For example, the report proposes triggers and indicators that should lead to heightened action by states, business, and the UN system, and also looks at the specific challenges posed by post-conflict reconstruction and peace building, including the key issues of access to remedy and transitional justice. We hope that these recommendations regarding heightened due diligence, for example, will be of use to ICoCA members. The report also explores newer areas deserving of specific attention, such as challenges that our cyber age present to the implementation of the guiding principles by states and business alike. In terms of heightened action, we do note that there isn't much progress beyond the security sector and that most states lack policy coherence or serious appetite to develop policies, regulations, and enforcement measures that effectively address the risk of gross human rights abuses for businesses operating in conflict situations, and to break down their internal silos when dealing with this issue. Similarly, it is striking to see the role and impact of business in conflict contexts have received little attention from the United Nations peace and security architecture. Finally, the 16th of June next year will mark the 10th anniversary of the UN Guiding Principles. This anniversary provides us with an opportunity to reflect on progress and challenges, and more importantly, to make a renewed push for a scaled up global implementation of the guiding principles over the next decade. To do that, we launched a project called Business and Human Rights toward a decade of global implementation. It's better known now as the UNGP's 10 Plus project. The project has two main components. We'll first take stock of the first 10 years of UNGP's implementation, assessing obstacles and opportunities to leverage faster, wider, and deeper change in the coming decade. We'll present a stock-taking report to the UN Human Rights Council in June 2021. We hope that ICoCA's experience and practice over nearly its own decade from 2013 on will also help inform this process. Second, we will design a roadmap for action in the decade toward 2030 and beyond, with the aim of providing strategic direction to all stakeholders. As I just mentioned, the UNGP's 10 Plus will be the opportunity to focus here again on fragile contexts because it remains where the most egregious human rights violations take place. Our last report provides us with clear elements of stock taking, but also for concrete opportunities to develop a larger enabling environment for respect for human rights in fragile and conflict affected areas. So just to conclude a few areas of what we are going to explore in the next phase. I mentioned, for example, that first we want to promote and leverage the lessons learned of implementing the Code of Conduct for Private Security Service Providers and the Montreux document across multiple jurisdictions to offer insights and see if they're transferable to a broader set of policy issues in conflict affected regions. So we want to see what lessons we can learn from ICoCA and apply them to different regions and also to different sectors. Second, as both the ICoCA and the Montreux Initiative have demonstrated success with respect to security providers, it could be time to look at the role of the broader defense sector at large, using both initiatives as templates. Third, as highlighted in the recommendations of the report, the establishment of a multilateral and multi-stakeholder forum to share and build on existing practices in the context of conflict and peace building is also sorely needed. This could be an opportunity as well to consider an international agreement that clarifies risks, prohibited activities, and modes of liability with respect to business and conflict or other high-risk situations, such as clarifying the types of gross human rights abuses that are prohibited and the consequences of breach. And finally, to support the need for heightened United Nations action in this space, including the development of a strategy on business, peace, and security, drawing on the guiding principles. I'm sure that there are many more areas where action is needed, which is why I look forward to our discussions today and in the coming months. Again, thank you for the invitation and thank you for your attention.